You hear footsteps echoing through marble corridors. Your hands are bound. Guards drag you forward, and through the towering doors ahead, you glimpse the assembled court. Nobles in silk, women with painted faces, all watching. The Tsar sits elevated, his eyes cold as winter. You know what's coming isn't execution. It's something worse, something that will strip away more than life. It will take your dignity, your name, everything your family ever was. The doors swing open. Everyone turns to look at you. And in that moment, you understand. This is theater. You are the performance. And the price of disloyalty isn't death. It's humiliation so complete that centuries later, chroniclers will still whisper about what happened in this room. Before we dive deeper into this dark corridor of history, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me every time that stories this old, this haunting, still connect us across every border and ocean. This scene wasn't fiction. On August 12, 1570, in the Kremlin Palace, Tsar Ivan IV, later called Ivan the Terrible, ordered exactly this fate for a rival prince accused of conspiracy. The punishment Ivan devised combined bodily mutilation, sexual violation, and public degradation in ways calculated not just to kill, but to destroy. The prince was stripped before the entire court. Executioners castrated him while Ivan watched and mocked. Then, naked and bleeding, the nobleman was paraded through Moscow's streets before his final execution. Ivan wasn't unique. Throughout history, absolute monarchs discovered that the most effective terror wasn't just violence. It was violation, physical cruelty paired with sexual humiliation, public spectacles that attacked not just the body, but identity, honor, family legacy. These weren't impulsive acts of rage. They were carefully designed psychological weapons, engineered to create fear so profound that no one would dare challenge royal power. This is the story of those kings, the ones who turned intimacy into interrogation, dignity into demonstration, bodies into billboards advertising the cost of rebellion. What follows isn't just about cruelty. It's about how power, when unchecked, invents new languages of terror. Ivan IV ruled Russia from 1547 until his death in 1584. The first half of his reign showed promise: legal reforms, territorial expansion, a functional bureaucracy. But after his beloved first wife Anastasia died in 1560, something broke inside him. Paranoia consumed him. He became convinced that traitors surrounded him, that poison had taken Anastasia, that every nobleman secretly plotted his downfall. His response was to create the Oprichnina, a state within the state, governed by his personal black-robed enforcers called the Oprichniki. These men answered only to Ivan. They could arrest, torture, and execute anyone without trial. They wore all black, rode black horses, and carried symbols of a broom and dog's head, meant to represent sweeping away treason and biting enemies. They possessed absolute immunity. Heinrich von Staden, a German mercenary who served as an Oprichnik, later wrote detailed memoirs that provide a horrifying window into Ivan's methods. Von Staden didn't write to condemn. He wrote to document, which makes his accounts more chilling. He describes how Ivan didn't merely order executions. He participated, personally, often with creativity that seemed designed as much for his own entertainment as for political effect. Public castration became one of Ivan's signature punishments for nobles suspected of disloyalty. The victim would be bound in a public square or within the Kremlin itself. Court members, including noble women, were required to attend. Executioners would remove the victim's genitals while Ivan watched from his throne, sometimes making sardonic comments. "Are you loyal now?" he reportedly asked one victim as the man screamed. Another time, he joked about whether the nobleman would miss his manhood in the afterlife. But why this particular cruelty? Why not simply execute traitors? The answer reveals Ivan's psychological strategy. Death ends suffering. Humiliation extends it. A beheading is over in seconds. The victim becomes a martyr. The family retains honor. But sexual mutilation, performed publicly, with forced nudity and mockery, destroys honor completely. It transforms the victim into an object of shame. Families couldn't speak the victim's name without invoking disgrace. The punishment echoed through generations. Russian chronicles from the period, preserved in the Nikon Chronicle, record that Ivan extended this strategy beyond individuals. When nobles were executed for treason, their wives were sometimes brought before the court. There, they were stripped and humiliated publicly before being sent to convents or, in some cases, distributed among the oprichniki as rewards. During the sacking of Novgorod in January 1570, one of the darkest episodes of Ivan's reign, the Tsar suspected the city of supporting his enemies. What followed was systematic terror. Chronicles record that Ivan ordered mass sexual violence against Novgorod's women as collective punishment. The Tsar himself reportedly observed from an elevated platform, turning mass trauma into spectacle. Thousands died. But before death came violation. The message was clear. Resistance doesn't just cost your life. It costs your family's dignity, your wife's honor, your daughter's future. Ivan was engineering a new mathematics of terror, where one act of punishment multiplied into countless acts of shame that radiated outward like shockwaves. Yet, here's what's haunting. Ivan saw himself as righteous. In his mind, these weren't atrocities. They were justice. Traitors deserved not just death, but annihilation. By destroying their sexual identity, their ability to reproduce, their families' reputations, Ivan believed he was purging Russia of corruption at its root. Halfway across the world, in Cairo during the early 11th century, another ruler was developing his own theater of intimate punishment. Al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah became the sixth Fatimid Caliph in 996 AD at age 11. By his 20s, he'd become notorious for erratic behavior and bizarre edicts. He banned certain vegetables, forbade chess, outlawed shoes for women entirely, believing that if women couldn't leave their homes, they couldn't sin. But Al-Hakim's obsessions went deeper than strange laws. He became fixated on controlling his subjects' intimate behaviors, seeing sexuality as a vector for social decay. Ibn al-Qalanisi, a contemporary Arab chronicler, documented how Al-Hakim believed that by physically removing transgressors' reproductive capacity, he was purifying society itself. Merchants caught selling foods Al-Hakim considered aphrodisiacs, certain nuts, honey mixtures, specific spices, were publicly castrated in Cairo's marketplaces. The punishment wasn't about theft or fraud, it was about the imagined sexual stimulation their products might cause. In one documented case preserved in medieval Arabic sources, Al-Hakim ordered that a man accused of looking inappropriately at a woman be castrated, then forced to wear women's clothing and work in the marketplace as a woman for the rest of his life. This punishment layered gender humiliation onto mutilation, creating a living example that walked Cairo's streets daily, a constant reminder of the cost of transgression. When Al-Hakim discovered a conspiracy among his viziers in 1016, he didn't execute them immediately. First, they were stripped naked and paraded through Cairo mounted backward on donkeys, a deeply humiliating position in Islamic culture. Then they were castrated in public. Only after that were they executed. The sequence mattered. Death wasn't the punishment. Degradation was. What drove Al-Hakim? Modern historians debate whether he suffered from mental illness, whether his behavior reflected genuine religious zealotry, or whether it was calculated political terror. Perhaps all three. His edicts grew increasingly bizarre until 1021, when he disappeared during one of his nocturnal walks through Cairo. Most historians believe he was assassinated, possibly by his own sister, Sitt al-Mulk, who'd grown weary of his tyranny and fearful for her own safety. In 15th century France, Louis XV, called the universal spider for his political webs, employed a different approach to intimate punishment. Louis ruled from 1461 to 1483, and he was brilliant at consolidation of royal power. But Philippe de Comines, a chronicler who served him, documented how Louis combined confinement with deliberate sexual humiliation as a tool of control. Louis had iron cages built, not large enough to stand in, not long enough to lie down in. Prisoners existed in perpetual crouch. But Louis added a twist. These cages were placed in public squares, and the prisoners inside were kept in undergarments or completely naked. Cardinal Jean Balue, who conspired against Louis, spent 11 years in such a cage from 1469 to 1480. According to de Comines, Balue was periodically stripped entirely and exhibited as part of his ongoing punishment. The nakedness wasn't incidental, it was central. It transformed a political prisoner into a humiliated spectacle, stripped of dignity along with clothing. But Louis's cruelest innovation involved forced marriage. When he captured enemy nobles, he sometimes compelled their daughters or widows to marry men of deliberately low social status, peasants, merchants, men of disreputable professions. In one case, Louis forced a rebel duke's daughter to marry the royal executioner, a profession considered utterly beneath nobility. But Louis didn't stop at the ceremony. He required the marriage to be consummated under supervision to ensure the union was valid and complete. Witnesses confirmed the act had occurred. This wasn't just punishment. It was strategic genius from Louis's perspective. It destroyed the noble family's honor through polluted blood. It rewarded the low-born husband with unexpected social elevation, ensuring his loyalty. And it demonstrated that even a woman's most intimate choices, whom she married, whom she lay with, belonged to the king. In Judea during the 1st century BC, King Herod, the same Herod who would become famous in Christian scripture, employed similar tactics of intimate violation as political terror. Herod ruled as a client king of Rome from 37 to 4 BC. Flavius Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian, extensively documented Herod's reign, including his paranoia and cruelty toward perceived threats. When Herod suspected his wife Mariamne of infidelity, he ordered an elaborate investigation. Her servants were tortured, and according to Josephus, the interrogations included sexual humiliation designed to extract confessions. When Mariamne was declared guilty based on testimony obtained under torture, Herod ordered her executed in 29 BC. But first came public degradation. Herod forced Mariamne to appear before the full court, while explicit accusations about her alleged intimate conduct were read aloud with degrading details. She stood there, a queen, while her sexual life was dissected publicly before nobles, priests, and court officials. Herod extended this practice to political enemies. When he executed nobles for treason, their wives and daughters were handed over to soldiers before being killed. Josephus mentions one case where Herod ordered an entire conspirator's family to be publicly violated in Jerusalem's theater as a punishment spectacle before their executions. The theater setting matters. Herod transformed sexual violence into public entertainment, a performance designed for maximum psychological impact on the watching population. The message, defying Herod, destroyed not just your life, but every trace of your family's honor. In 15th century Wallachia, modern-day Romania, Vlad III earned his nickname the Impaler through his preferred execution method. But Vlad didn't just impale, he weaponized the method itself as intimate punishment. Saxon chronicles from Transylvania and German pamphlets printed shortly after Vlad's death describe how he ordered women accused of adultery or prostitution to be impaled specifically through their genital areas. The stake was inserted in a particular way to maximize both pain and humiliation. A German manuscript from 1488 recounts how Vlad ordered a rival nobleman's mistress to be impaled and displayed naked at his castle entrance as a warning. The combination, forced nudity, violation by the stake, public exhibition, created a spectacle that transcended simple execution. For male traitors, Vlad invented variations. A boyar accused of adultery was castrated, his genitals forced into his mouth, then impaled while still alive. Vlad personally supervised these punishments, reportedly eating meals while watching, demonstrating a coldness that terrorized his subjects into submission. In 14th century Delhi, Sultan Muhammad bin Tughluq ruled the Delhi Sultanate from 1325 to 1351. Ibn Battuta, the famous Moroccan traveler, spent years at Tughluq's court and documented the Sultan's elaborate punishment rituals. A favorite punishment involved forcing the condemned to wear donkey skin, then parading them through Delhi while crowds mocked and spat on them. For more serious crimes, Tughluq added sexual elements. A provincial governor who rebelled was captured, stripped naked, his clothes burned, then mounted backward on a donkey and paraded through the city. Afterward, he was publicly castrated before execution. Ibn Battuta personally witnessed another case. A courtier suspected of an affair with a woman from the royal harem was forced to undress and was publicly whipped on his genitals before execution. The woman was stoned, but first was forced to watch her lover's punishment. Tughluq justified these punishments as necessary for maintaining order and morality, but historians recognize them as manifestations of increasing paranoia from an unstable ruler who saw sexual transgression everywhere. Even in Tudor England, King Henry VIII used marriage and intimacy as tools of punishment and control. When Henry desired Anne Boleyn, he broke from Rome to marry her. But when she failed to produce a male heir, he had her executed on fabricated adultery charges in May 1536. Her trial was unusual. Extremely explicit details of her alleged sexual relations were read in open court. This forced Anne to sit and hear degrading accusations before the entire court, deliberately humiliating the queen before her death. Catherine Howard, his fifth wife, suffered similarly in 1542. Her trial included detailed testimonies about her intimate behavior before and during marriage. Chroniclers noted the unusually explicit nature of the accusations, designed for maximum shame. Henry also controlled marriages among his nobility. Daughters of families who displeased him were forced into marriages with men. Henry chose specifically to humiliate the family. Old men, poor men, men of questionable reputation. These forced marriages attacked family honor through degrading unions. The pattern across centuries and continents is striking. Different cultures, different justifications, but the same dark innovation. Rulers discovered that sexual humiliation was more effective than death alone. Why? Because death ends narrative. Humiliation continues it. An executed enemy becomes a martyr. A sexually humiliated enemy becomes an object of shame that families cannot honor, that history struggles to discuss, that exists in perpetual disgrace. These punishments attacked identity at its most vulnerable point: the body, intimacy, family honor. They transformed privacy into spectacle, dignity into degradation, and they used the victim's own body as a billboard advertising the cost of defiance. The survivors, witnesses, chroniclers, families, couldn't forget. They couldn't unhear the screams, couldn't unsee the nakedness, couldn't unknow the violation. That was the point. Terror that embedded itself into collective memory, passing through generations like inherited trauma. In archives across Moscow, Cairo, Paris, and Delhi, records of these punishments still exist. Faded chronicles, court documents, witness testimonies preserved in careful script. They describe things historians still struggle to discuss in academic language. One document from Ivan's court, a petition from a nobleman's widow, survives in the Russian State Archive. She begs for her husband's body for burial, but she never names what was done to him. She can't. The shame is too complete. In Cairo's medieval archives, a judicial record from Al-Hakim's reign lists punishments, but uses euphemisms so delicate they barely convey what happened. Yet everyone at the time knew. The euphemisms existed because the reality was unspeakable. These silences in the record, the things chroniclers couldn't or wouldn't fully describe, speak louder than explicit description. They reveal how thoroughly these punishments achieved their goal, creating shame so deep it silenced even historical memory. Stand in the Kremlin today, in the halls where Ivan's court assembled. The walls are beautiful, gold leaf, religious icons, architectural magnificence. But if you know the history, you can't unsee it. In this room, people were stripped. In this room, bodies were violated while crowds watched. In this room, intimate violation became state policy. The walls remember. The stones remember. And now, centuries later, we remember too. Not because these stories are comfortable, but because they reveal a truth about power. Unchecked authority doesn't just seek obedience, it seeks totality. It wants to control not just actions but dignity, not just bodies but identity, not just life but legacy. These kings invented sexual punishment not from passion but from calculation. They understood something dark about human psychology. We can endure pain, but shame destroys us differently. It reaches into places death cannot touch. And so they built theaters of humiliation, turned intimacy into interrogation, made the most private violations public spectacles, not because they were merely cruel, but because they understood that the cruelest weapon isn't steel. It's shame. And shame, once inflicted publicly, never fully heals. It echoes through families, through records, through centuries. In the end, these rulers are remembered not for their achievements, but for their cruelties. Their architectural wonders crumbled, their empires collapsed. But the shame they inflicted, that remains preserved in faded ink and whispered histories, a permanent stain that no amount of time can fully erase.